please come to order. We now have a quorum, we can begin. Mike, would you call the roll?
Chairperson Jones.
Here.
Committee member Dudley. Committee member William. Committee member Conlon. Committee member Lane. Here. Committee member Dexter.
Here.
Committee member Jans.
Here.
Committee member Kay.
Here he is.
There he is. Committee member Wynn.
Here.
And committee member Malzbeck.
Here.
We'll start this evening with public comments. We have some visitors here from Menlo Park who would like to talk with us. Maria, would you like to open up and present your material?
Thank you. Yes, actually Marcia Bromowitz, who's also a board member of the Felton Gables homeowners, which we both are, and Marcia will be presenting our comments.
So
right.
First of all, thank you very much for welcoming us, and thanks for putting us first on your agenda. We appreciate it. So as you may or may not know, Felton Gables is a neighborhood of 127 homes, and we obviously share a border along Holbrook Palmer Park and adjacency to the railroad tracks and all of the lovely noise that comes along with that. We are here to share our views on the letter that you all received from Mayor Kirsten Keith from Menlo Park. And to recap, her letter asked Atherton for their point of view on two items. The first is installing a hybrid grade separation at Encinal. That would be about 10 feet up and then 10 feet down, and would come down to grade before Watkins, but would obviously be above grade in Atherton, the Atherton area. And the second option they asked for your point of view on is pursuing grade separation at Watkins and Fair Oaks using like a viaduct that would extend across Menlo Park and Atherton. And as a neighborhood, Felton Gables has been vocal, as Atherton over the years. We've shared the point of view that you know, we have to be very careful, or the train needs to be very careful about what exists in residential areas. And our position as a neighborhood association is that any kind of elevated train, be it a berm or a viaduct, does not belong in a residential area, therefore does not belong at Encinal or belong here at Watkins, for the following reasons. First, they create a physical divide between neighborhoods and sides of town. They are unsightly, they cast shadows, they increase ambient noise and vibration because the train is now above. They generate visual and privacy concerns for those that live and work nearby. They decrease quality of life and property values. And then if you think back on the aerial transportation structures that existed in San Francisco, I used to live there, 20 some odd years ago before moving down here to Menlo Park. I think about the Central Freeway and before the earthquake, and about how horrible it was having these elevated, they weren't trains, but these freeways overhead. And once those things came down, I mean, it just brought sunlight and happiness to Hayes Valley and also to the area of the Embarcadero. And it would be a horrible thing to actually construct something like that, knowing what the consequences are. So as such, we oppose any above ground grade separation at Encinal. And since the area is fully residential, and once the former Roger Reynolds site is developed, it'll be even more residential. Our belief is that quad gates and a quiet zone status would best meet the needs of the neighborhood, as well as what the traffic requires at that crossing. There are 4 crossings in Menlo Park, and Encinal is the least traveled. It gets less than 10% of all of the east-west vehicular traffic. 5,000 is the average number of daily vehicle trips across Encinal. And for comparison, Ravenswood gets 24,000. And also, it's not an east-west corridor because it ends at Menlo College. So it's really, as far as the 4 crossings go in Menlo Park, it's the least in terms of need to grade separate. And then additionally, construction for grade separation would take many years, probably 4 to 6 years is what we've read. We believe that a far better solution to improve safety and to reduce noise would be the quad gates and quiet zone. The cost for that is, I understand, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 million for quad gates, which would increase safety for all the reasons that you guys are well aware because of what's happened at Fair Oaks, and there wouldn't be any horns, as you guys all know here. And so that would be just a wonderful benefit for all of us. Sorry.
Not any.
Pardon me?
Not many horns. Let's not do the not any.
Fewer. Many
Far
fewer.
horns.
Many fewer.
So, so we have really been proactive about trying to get a sense of the pulse of the neighbors near the Encinal crossing. And so we have talked to folks on both Felton Gables side and on the Stone Pine side, and asked folks to sign letters to the Menlo Park City Council expressing their views that they are against grade separation at Encinal. And we can, with a kind of a loud thud, share with you 230 some odd letters that were collected just over the past several days. I also spent a little bit of time over the weekend walking along Encinal and Laurel in Atherton, because you guys have residents who live in close proximity to the Encinal crossing. And everyone I met, I had 4 really wonderful conversations with people on Bassett Lane and on Encinal, and all 4 of those people actually signed the same letter and just changed the address to you guys, so we can leave those 4 letters with you. I'm sure that if we had more time and if people didn't have as many long driveways with gates, we would have even more letters to share with you. But our feeling is that, you know, universally, everyone who lives in close proximity to the Atherton crossing is against grade separation there and far more in favor of quad gates and a quiet zone. Let's see. So our hope tonight is that, you know, you folks will come to the conclusion, the same conclusion that we have, and that you will share that point of view with your city council, and that we can all work together to influence Menlo Park and end up with quad gates and a quiet zone that'll really just allow for nice quiet train flow from, you know, somewhere south of Encinal to somewhere north of Atherton. Thank you.
Let's put this in perspective a little bit here. What they're proposing, as I understand it, is very much like what has been done in San Carlos and Belmont.
Correct.
So it would be a raised berm going through there and a slightly depressed highway going underneath.
Correct. That was, so Mayor Keith's letter, I believe, had 2 options there. The first one is exactly what you were describing. It's 10 foot up, 10 foot down. And the way Menlo Park is looking at that, they're calling that option C. They got money from the county to look at grade separations in Menlo Park, and so the 2 options that they ended up studying, the first one was just grade separating Ravenswood by depressing Ravenswood and actually keeping the train at grade. And then the second option that they studied, and this has been over pretty much the past year, was grade separating Ravenswood, Oak Grove, and Glenwood with this hybrid structure that you're describing. And what happened subsequent to that study in the October Menlo Park City Council meeting was the request that the city consider actually grade separating all 4 crossings and looking at a viaduct. And that's really what kind of got the ball rolling and prompted the letter to Atherton.
So if I could,
as a bearer of bad news, this item was not, it's fine to take this information as part of the public comment. It's not appropriate for the committee to discuss it because, again, this was not an agenda item. This item is on the agenda for the City Council study session tomorrow, and where the City Council will be discussing and taking into consideration the request from Mayor Keith.
can we discuss it at the end of the meeting during the member discussion and period?
No.
No, we cannot. Okay.
Sorry.
Can you discuss it after the meeting?
Once this meeting is adjourned, you can discuss it to your heart's
Well,
content.
then I have a question about item 6, committee and staff member comments.
Yeah, that's
What
what
is the scope of what a committee member can talk about in item 6?
Well, I think the whole intent, and one of the reasons I'm not an attorney for the Brown Act is basically what, for your, under the committee and staff member comments, is to just, not discuss, but to share information that isn't on the agenda. So just like, Mr. Brown just did, sharing information, but it's not appropriate to discuss that information.
I'd like to ask one question before we start. Since we have a Caltrain representative here, do you have any feelings one way or another about this subject?
Frankly, I'm not really that much involved in some of the great separation work and studies that have been going on. A lot of them have been led by the local cities themselves, kind of working with the different planning groups.
So once again, this is on the agenda for tomorrow's city council
Well,
study
thank you.
session.
All right. Mike, I believe you had some public comments you wanted to make.
Can I ask a question? Just, I don't think I'm discussing anything, but do we have copies? Or does the committee have a copy that I could see of this letter?
Of the letter?
That started the whole thing?
I don't.
It's on the city council agenda for tomorrow, so if you go look at
It's on the city's website.
if you go to the website, go look at tomorrow's agenda, there's a link and it has both Mayor Keith's letter as well as the letter from the HOA for Felton Gables.
And also, just to be clear, I got the impression that she was asking for feedback from the council or the committee's responses that we legally, through the Brown Act, cannot. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we misunderstood. We thought that you folks would be providing a point of view for tomorrow, so please excuse us for
Well,
No,
as
misunderstanding.
individuals, we're as welcome to go there as anyone else, so we can express points of view over there.
Okay, terrific.
They are the most important people to
Okay.
convince is the ones tomorrow.
And
But
sometimes they
Okay.
listen to us.
one of them is here, so
Okay.
he's heard all your comments. And so tomorrow, I think you'll only get maybe 3 minutes, so at least Carrie knows more about your background and where you guys are coming from, which is good.
Well, thank you
Because of
very
the Brown
much
Act,
for coming and bringing
Yeah.
your comments.
Well, thank you all for indulging us tonight. So,
Mike, would you?
Thank you for coming.
Would you
Can
care
we
to?
put anything on the agenda with a 2/3 vote?
For next meeting?
Not for this
Not this
meeting,
meeting.
no.
Not for this meeting, no.
If it's not advertised to the public, we can't take any action on it.
Well, you can't take any action, but to limit discussion.
Well, that constitutes action by a rather devious definition.
What is the deadline for adding something to the agenda?
72
Well,
hours.
the way the agendas are created is that typically about a week prior to this meeting, I meet with Carrie and Paul to develop the agenda. And as far as posting the agenda, I think it's 72 hours prior
Okay.
to.
Say again?
72 hours prior to the meeting, I believe, is the posting requirement
For the agenda.
for the agenda.
Yeah.
So any additions have to be made
Yeah, I
prior to that.
tried to get it on, but it
Yes.
was a little, I guess, a little late because it was kind of after I saw it wasn't on the agenda. Then I saw the letter from the HOA, and I go like,
We are like-minded on this.
oh, you also saw it
Yes,
too. Okay.
yes.
Okay.
We're like-minded.
How did you guys find out about it?
There was an email that was sent to the group regarding grade separation, I think, right?
Well, maybe-
I sent the Menlo Park one,
Yeah.
just general
Yeah.
that they sent a letter, but I don't think the HOA letter was up until much later. I think
Okay.
the city council received that later, and then it was appended to the Menlo Park letter.
Whether
So
it
we'll
makes
try-
any,
Go
whether
ahead.
it makes any difference or not, the agenda came out far more than 72 hours before the meeting. It usually comes out after Friday afternoon, it's published on Friday, but this agenda was published in the middle of last week.
But not posted. The key is posted 72 hours. So that
As
means
a
that
committee member, you were given, you
Okay.
were sent it, we sent it out earlier
You-
to the committee members.
So if we see it in advance of the 72-hour deadline, we can add something to it?
Again, the way that things get on the agenda is the chair and the council member.
So in the future, we should ask the chair and the council
Yes.
member?
Yes.
Okay, I
Right.
was not aware of that procedure, but okay, that's good to know, it's good to know.
You can send your suggestions in to the chair, and then the
Okay.
chair has the
Thanks,
ability to
Gary.
bring it up.
Okay.
You're all
And then
hard.
that
Paul,
way-
it's up to you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give you guys the avenue. If
Okay,
you-
fine, just so we know.
All right, the Atherton case against High Speed Rail is going before the court on Friday, and I've asked Mike Brady if he would give us a brief summary of the issues there and, well, just the
Sure.
issues.
As you know, Proposition 1A creates some pretty rigid requirements that the High Speed Rail Authority has to comply with before spending Proposition 1A money. And the High Speed Rail Authority was frustrated for many years and therefore pushed through the legislature a statute called 1889. And that statute made it easy to get around some of these rigid requirements of Proposition 1A. Well, that's illegal because the legislature can't pass a statute that amends something that's been passed by the people, like Proposition 1A. They can't make it easy. They can't do an end run. They can't water down Proposition 1A. So we filed a lawsuit asking the court to declare the statute unconstitutional and therefore imposing the rigid requirements of 1A once again upon the High Speed Rail Authority. So that matter is going to be heard on the merits on Friday in Sacramento before Judge Kenny. Is the statute unconstitutional because it seeks to revise, modify, or change Proposition 1A? So we're all set, and you're welcome to come up if you want. And Stu Flashman will be presenting the argument. The clients are Atherton and the County of Kings County are the two clients. Any questions?
And Tony,
If it is declared unconstitutional, what are the consequences as far as what's happened and what can happen in the near future?
There would probably be a stoppage of the use of Proposition 1A bond funds in the Central Valley, and we also think here on the peninsula, because you're now aware that High Speed Rail Authority has a contractual arrangement with Caltrain to give them money, and some of that money will come from Proposition 1A to do what Caltrain plans to do. And that would be illegal. That would be illegal if Proposition 1A applies and if this other statute is declared unconstitutional. So it would be a major stumbling block in the path of what Caltrain plans.
Does that mean that they can't start construction of electrification?
Could mean, yeah.
they would have to find other funds. They'd have to find other sources of support for it. The suit is against High Speed Rail, it's not against Caltrain.
Yeah, this is against High Speed Rail.
How long does it normally take between hearing and a decision being written? That's pretty variable, I guess. What's your guess?
30 to 45 days.
Well, thank you very much,
You're
Mike.
welcome.
I appreciate you doing that. Now, if you ladies would like to get home, thank you for coming.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for coming.
Thank you for coming.
They're not
It's nice to
telling, they're
meet
not
you.
telling you to leave, but
That's
they're
right.
giving you an
That's okay.
opportunity.
We might be there a couple hours.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, now we get down to the routine work of approving the minutes. You've all received copies of the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections that you'd like to make to them?
On roll call, Ellen was not when I was.
That's right, Ellen was not there. Well, a few more times, Tony, and we'll get around to getting you on there. Are there other corrections to the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve them as corrected?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
I don't raise this as a late correction or anything, but there is something in the minutes which, under this memorial plaque thing, the second bullet says selected version to be shared with John. And I have no doubt that that's a correct statement of what happened at the meeting, but John never seen it.
Well, I apologize for that, John, because that was what happened at the meeting, and it was intended that you should see it. The next item is to introduce John Mulbich as our 10th member, filling out our full committee. And as we all remember, his dear wife Rosemary was a staunch member of this committee for many, many years. And we're delighted to welcome John tonight to his first formal meeting. Would you give us just a few words about you and your interests, John?
Sure. I guess my interest developed over the last 12 years at the kitchen table, hearing from Rosemary about the activities of the rail committee. I mean, that in addition to the fact that I lived as close to the tracks as she did.
Really?
I wasn't there as often, but and have the same strong feelings that I suspect most people in this room have about trying to protect our quality of life from things that go on in the railroad. They're not all bad things, but nonetheless, one has to keep an eye on what's going on, see things that you prefer not happen, and try to take some action to stop it. My personal background is I'm an engineer. I have degrees in mechanical engineering. It was a fairly theoretical track that I took through the mechanical engineering department at MIT, so I have almost no practical skills whatsoever.
Theoretical mechanical engineering? Interesting.
Well, I took a lot of courses in applied physics, mathematics. Did a lot of analysis. I never built anything.
Okay.
Most of my career was in Palo Alto at the Electric Power Research Institute. I retired from that. I can hardly believe I'm using this number 18 years ago. Started a consulting practice, which got me a little closer to practical things. I ended up in the sites of power plants testing cooling towers in very hot weather and climbing very tall ladders. I don't do that anymore. But anyway, whatever background I have, either educationally, professionally, or domestically from what I learned from Rosemary, I'm happy to contribute and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, John. We certainly welcome you and we look forward to your being a very valued member of the committee.
We'll do with that.
John, there seems to be a consistency between your retirement and her going on the rail committee. Is there any connection?
I think I retired a little bit before.
Not long, though. All right, the next item is for our guests who've been very patient back here from Caltrain to give us an update on the electrification project.
Right, and actually the first two items, tree removal and the OCS pole height, they're kind of connected. And that's what Caltrain will be sharing with
Okay,
with
well,
the
this
committee.
is what we want to talk about, and we have comments on those.
And what they're gonna be providing is, a couple of options, a single track cantilever and a double track cantilever option. With each one, it requires different pole heights. And this actually came up at last month's city council meeting. And we will be bringing this item back to city council at the December 20th meeting. But one of the requests of city council was to have the rail committee weigh in on this, what the rail committee's opinion is with regards to pole heights and the various options.
Paul, in furtherance of this, because it's rather abstract, can I just pass out some pictures that would help people visualize these things?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, so, if you could just
Want to take one or?
Just take one, yes, please. So,
I'm okay. Yep.
so, if you just could pass those around and then just pass this around. So the,
And Stacy, can you interact if you hear something in conflict? Because I don't know if you've seen these. Okay.
So what I tried to do here, because nobody has really, in the environmental impact report, there is no photo or simulated photo of what a double track cantilever pole is. There's simply a line drawing which is not to scale. So it actually is not easy to find. There's nothing in the environmental impact report. So after looking a very considerable time, I looked at the example of Denver, which, as you know, is the same contractor, Balfour Beatty. And their standard is also the same standard as Caltrain, and that is to have 30-foot high 2 outside poles. But there are certain instances where they can't put a second foundation in, and they go to the double track cantilever, and that is shown here. So this is not the same, exactly the same, we don't know. It's a picture from Denver, but it does show that 50% of the height of the pole is across above the horizontal span, and this case, the pole in the case here that's being proposed for Lloyden Park, the height is 46 feet, and the horizontal span is 45 feet.
And what are these that we're looking at?
That's the electrification pole for Lloyden Park area. Instead of this is called a 46-foot double track cantilever. Instead of, the next page, if you will, is the actual simulated photograph from the environmental impact report, and it shows the standard treatment of 30-foot poles, 2 outside poles. So you can see it's a much shorter pole, it's 30 instead of 46, and it has a much more limited cantilever because it's reaching a much shorter distance. So this is what is standard for the entire Caltrain corridor, and that's why it's in the environmental impact report. 2 outside poles. This is what is not standard, but it is what is going to be north of Fair Oaks Lane to the Redwood City border. Redwood City, it switches over to, again, the standard 30-foot poles. This will be north of Fair Oaks Lane, because north of Fair Oaks Lane, the tracks narrow, and there is not enough spacing to put a center line pole. So normally, the typical standard treatment would be 2 30-foot outside poles, but they're not, Caltrain has not specified that. They told their design build contractor to use double track cantilever. Now, this double track cantilever pole does do one thing. It has a much more massive foundation. So some trees, there will be root destruction because it's a much larger foundation to support this massive, in event of catastrophe. But what I wanted to say is it does save 2 feet of pruning, tree pruning, 2 feet, on the side of the track that is opposite the foundation. So on this side where there's a foundation, this will have 18 feet of electrical safety zone pruning. So 18 feet beyond here is an electrical safety zone where there'll be pruning. On the other side here, it has to span both tracks. On this side, instead of 18 feet of pruning, there'll be 16 feet of pruning. It saves 2 feet of pruning on the opposite side. And that would be through the standard treatment of two 30-foot outside poles. So I just wanted to give you a photo because it's very hard to picture what this would look like otherwise. Now, Caltrain has said they prefer, Zhenlin Guan was here, he said they prefer the 30-foot standard poles in case of catastrophic event, and because the cost of installing this foundation is much cheaper. But anyway, these will be starting approximately 800 feet north of Fair Oaks Lane, going to the Redwood City border, then Redwood City switch over. And in Menlo Park, they'll switch over to 30-foot standard poles as well. So it's just this little segment, and I'm sure selected locations where there is an easily installed foundation. So I just wanted to give you that so have some reference.
Can I ask a question?
It's up to Paul.
Yeah.
At the point where the tracks are at their widest, the separation at their widest, would that one cantilever span both tracks?
Yes,
or would
that's
you need one from each side like that?
no where the track centers are wider, where they're 21 feet apart or greater. They have to be, according to Caltrain standards, they have to be 21 feet apart. That's a Caltrain standard. You would have near the station and near Holbrook Palmer Park. You would just have one pole in the center, the same 30-foot pole. You would have one pole in the center, and it would have two cantilevers reaching both tracks from that single center line pole. But it would be 30 feet. These are going to be 50% higher north of Fair Oaks Lane. If they went with this configuration, we would have the standard 30-foot poles. Somehow we ended up with this configuration in a residential neighborhood. Now, this will be seen from a very great distance. It will be seen from both sides of the track, particularly with this massive horizontal span. And there is a provision in the Environmental Impact Report which says, it's called Mitigation Measure AES-2B. AES stands for aesthetics. And the Environmental Impact Report commits Caltrain in January of 2014, commits Caltrain to select that pole design which will blend in with the built and natural environment as much as feasible. So this pole would violate the terms of that mitigation agreement, that mitigation measure.
Just add a couple things just for consideration. Narissa has done her homework well, and a lot of that is very true. One other thing that I just wanted to add, just as a finer point, in the mitigation commitment that was adopted by our board, also by FTA, was the minimization of trees. So 2 feet of ESC is factually what is saved by this taller structure. We received so many comments in the EIR phase that trees were the #1 priority, avoid them at all costs, as this was a pure kind of black and white implementation of eliminating or reducing the amount of tree impacts that we could, and even if that included the taller pole structure, the double track cantilever. We do have other areas that are residential that have the double track cantilever that were specified in order to minimize the trees. So what we're looking at is there's 14 trees that are pruned less than 25% in this structure, and then there is one less tree removal. So
if I could just, I wanted to clarify something, Stacy.
Yeah.
Would it be all right, Paul, if I said something to clarify? The reporting of the number of trees over time that have been saved. So as Mike has reported, when we started out with the draft environmental impact report, going to the final environmental impact report, going to the preliminary design, the number of trees that were going to be removed and pruned severely, that is greater than 25%, was drastically reduced. But it was not a function of installing those 46-foot cantilever poles. It was a function of decreasing the electrical safety zone standards for pruning. So in the draft EIR, the electrical safety zone was 24 feet on both sides for pruning. By the time it got to the final EIR, it was 21. By the time it got to the preliminary design, the electrical safety zone was 18 feet. So 6 feet was saved for pruning on both sides if you would have the outside poles. That's how the trees were saved. And in addition, last summer, the town negotiated to install, with Caltrain's agreement, to install adjacent to Holbrook Palmer Park only, the center line pole. And that saved trees at Holbrook Palmer Park. But again, the number of trees that we've always told have been saved were not a function of the 46-foot poles. So I think that clarified things for me.
A couple things for clarity. So, and then Caltrain, correct me, but
Sure.
as far as when you say negotiated for Holbrook Palmer Park, what Caltrain has done is they are using center poles wherever they can within the town, which means that wherever there's adequate width between the tracks, they are utilizing the center line poles. And so for the town of Atherton, what that means is basically from Holbrook Park, Palmer Park, going north to about 1,000 feet north of Fair Oaks Lane. From that point on, then there was not adequate space between the tracks to utilize the center, so they had to use this. So that's when they went to the outside poles. And as you know, as a result of what Stacy indicated, that the direction was to select an alternative which minimizes the impact of trees. At least in the town of Atherton, they went to what they're calling the double track cantilever, which is, I'm not sure if this is what it's going to look like in Atherton, but the concept is what's in this.
It looks just like the drawing they have in their
and
documents.
So one of the things that the council wanted this committee to weigh in on was by going with what is the difference in tree impacts by going with the double track cantilever design versus the single track cantilever design. And so since our November council meeting, Caltrain has looked into that, and we're going to share that information. And so, because again, what the council's interested in is having this committee weigh in on, based on the tree impact information, is there, what is the preference or recommendation of this committee with respect to going with the single track cantilever design versus the double track cantilever design?
So there is a little bit of a combination of the reduction of the ESC over time as we've kind of looked at this and how can we refine the design and pull in what is driving the electric safety zone, which would be whatever is the outermost electrified component. So it's really a combination of what Marissa said. There has been great strides to reduce the electric safety zone overall, but even further, the double track cantilever does pull in the electric safety zone in addition to the design refinement that's happened throughout the course of
yes, it saves the 2 feet
That's right.
on one side. But what the trade-off is, and Paul was saying that although that's a picture from Denver, it exactly mirrors the design which I was able to get from Caltrain on 11/15. The city council knew nothing about double track cantilever poles or the 46-foot height. Mike's report to the city council meeting on November 15th was that the pole heights were to be 25 to 30 feet throughout Atherton. So this was new news to Mike, but it was new news to the city council on November 15th. I had found this out from meeting with Zhenlin Guan, and I got this from Stacy. But this diagram for Atherton, does mirror the photograph here in Denver. There is no photograph of this or simulation in the environmental impact report. I had to find something. But I think one thing that's terribly important is now, as Stacy has reported, 14 trees will have to be pruned less than 25%. And one tree, apparently, this is brand new news today, will have to be removed. But the trade-off is that you're going to destroy the aesthetics and the neighborhood impact with these massive industrial type poles in a residential area. These things will tower. They will not be able to be hidden by trees, and they'll be seen from both sides of the tracks, particularly with this massive span.
They'll be seen from a good distance.
They'll be
right?
seen from a good distance. Now, Paul has looked into the fact that, I'm not going to speak for you, but these are a less rigid design, and there is some concern about their safety, as Caltrain had said. They prefer the 30-foot poles in case of catastrophic event, but I'm not going to speak to that.
No, with regards to, now this is a question I have for Caltrain. For the single track cantilever in the thing that was just handed out, it shows a pole height of 30 to 35 feet. But within the town of Atherton, it's my understanding that that pole height is going to be a function of the quality of the soil. Is that right?
The pole height is a function of a variety of design considerations, therefore there's a range from 30 to 35. What typically we have seen in designs that have been brought up to issue for construction in other areas for single track cantilevers, 32 foot tall. That's the typical height that we're seeing. There
32?
32. There are some that can get up to 35 based on, again, soil conditions or some other OCS design reasons, and that's where the 35 comes into play. So the range is in that 30 to 35, just depending on what we find from soil condition perspective and from other design considerations.
Right. And likewise, the EIR says the poles can go up to 50 feet. So the range in the EIR is 30 to 50 feet. And that's 46 feet above the track level. So the track in some areas is on an embankment, it's raised on an embankment.
Is there not a third alternative here that may or may not have been looked at? You can have a box frame over the track without having a single track cantilever that's secured to poles on either side of the track with the OCS wires down below the beams. Does that design even been looked at?
Typically, you have portals just in the terminal.
Typically speaking, the box structure, which what we call as a portal, the portals are used only on a more than 2-track area. So if the section is a 3-track or a 4-track area, or you have to service multiple tracks more than 2, when we switch to the portal type of configuration, the portals are not small because the beam that you have across it is, even though in height it is shorter, it is still a massive structure because the beam that runs across the top.
You have a substantial piece of steel there, that's true.
That's correct, yep.
But you also get a more rigid structure.
So, and I think I just maybe want to clarify, so it's not that we at all think 2-track cantilevers are unsafe. So just clarification, I think the part that is a compromise on Caltrain's perspective is the operational. So if something were to happen and a wire came down, that would be the whole area in that vicinity would not be able to run an electrified service. We're not concerned at all that it's not a rigid structure and the cantilever would fall down on the tracks.
Right, but Paul is.
No, we're not suggesting that.
Right.
Okay, I just get nervous when we talk about safety stuff.
That's not an issue.
Can you identify the other jurisdictions that have the center line or the cantilever component?
Yeah, so we actually, we counted in the first 2 work areas that we're doing work in right now, which is focused in South San Francisco, Millbrae, San Bruno. Those are the 3 cities that we've done work in so far. And we have a total of 74 of these double track cantilever structures. I don't have the detailed breakdowns of how many are in each city, but 74 out of somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 or so. Total poles we've got out there is the 2-track cantilevers. Right. And that's just due to a variety of reasons that we've run into utilities out there, other designs, but that's the number that we have so far.
But the reason here is captured just in this tree count.
Yes.
This is the only reason you're trying to do it here.
That is correct.
I mean, you're saving, the trade-off for destroying neighborhoods is light pruning, less than 25% on 14 trees, and the removal of 1 tree. That's the trade-off for this, versus something which everybody believed until November 15th. Everybody believed was going to be the situation, which is the standard. Caltrain is saying this is the standard treatment for the corridor. It's when you can't have a second foundation. So for light pruning of 14 additional trees, there's going to be well over, there's well over 114 trees that are getting light pruning now. But I just want to make clear, there's a trade-off here, and there are 60 signatures already on a letter to Caltrain's Joint Powers Board saying, please don't destroy our modest neighborhood with industrial-style double-track cantilevers when we could have more of a residential type of feel. And this is what's at stake. You simply can't conceal this. You can't conceal this. The average utility pole in your backyard is 20 feet. This is 46 feet. This is standard.
No, it's more than 20 feet.
And if I may, just
Can I ask, excuse me, can I interrupt? a second? First of all, I'd like you to state your names because this is all being recorded and I don't know who you are. I understand you're from Caltrain, apparently.
Stacy Cox.
Link 1.
Thank you. Let me ask one, can you tell me what the parameters are of each, where is the location of each end of this stretch in the photograph?
Yeah, the streets aren't showing up, but essentially this is the snapshot, and we're going over the map, sorry, I'll explain this. So this is basically corresponding to the table and the tree numbers, and this is the area, and I can get back with you of the specifics where on the bottom half, this is showing the tree impacts with the 2-track cantilever, and then the top is showing what the tree delta would be. I don't have the exact boundaries, but it's approximately, so it's the 5 foundations, and they're spaced about 200 feet apart. I don't know. So we can see on the top one, this is the Atherton. Oh, is this Fair Oaks here? Yeah.
Okay. Dimitri looked this up on Google Maps,
Here's a border.
and his conclusion was that 1,000 feet from Fair Oaks Lane was at about the intersection
This is Atherton,
of
North
Floyd
Fair
and
Oaks
Below.
divide. See, this is a
Stacy,
city
can
border.
you reiterate the number of poles between?
But we don't know where that
Side and the
relates.
cantilever component. I
Oh,
don't
the
think
total
it's-
number of poles?
Yeah, just so everybody here knows.
Do you have that
Between-
down?
If it was
It
single,
doesn't
it
have
would be
mileage.
5.
Oh, yeah, so
Here,
in this
50
specific
feet.
area that
So
we're
it's 50
talking
feet,
about, it
and
would
then
be
this is the border.
5 double
No
track
Fair Oaks
cantilevers versus 10 total foundations, because you go from 5
Right.
foundations on one side to then 1 on either side. And then Lynn, just for clarification, so Lynn was just looking at the figure a little more closely.
So just a real quick clarification on this photo that you've got here. This structure is actually servicing 3 tracks.
Yes,
So-
I realize that they
Right,
have
so
an
that's-
extra, drought.
That's
But the
correct.
only reason, there's nothing in the EIR.
I understand,
So,
I just wanna be making
I
very,
just selected this because it mirrors your diagram exactly. The height is equal to roughly to the horizontal span, and the height above the horizontal span is roughly 50%. There is nothing in the EIR. I had to find something. Balfour Beatty just installed this as the exception in Denver.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to be-
it's my only recourse to something that looks like your diagram.
Sure, and just one other thing I think I'd like to just clarify, I know, Harrison, a couple of times I think you mentioned that the single outside poles is the Caltrain standard. I wanna clarify that is, Caltrain does not yet have a standard on what the OCS pole is, however, that is the preference. I absolutely agree
Well,
with you.
Lynn, you're the one who told me several times it was the standard.
I think there's a, so that's why I want to clarify, right? It's not a standard, it is a preference from a design perspective. Because of the things Stacy talked about earlier, if there's an event, a pole gets knocked down, and you have a 2-track cantilever, there's a loss now to both tracks in terms of service. If you have the single outside poles, if you lose one pole, you still maintain service to the other track. It's a preference.
Yeah.
But
And the
it's
other
not quite
element
a
was
standard.
it has the largest electric safety zone. So when we did the corridor-wide assessment of largely its right-of-way and tree impacts, it's gonna have the largest footprint. That's also a standard practice in a CEQA document that you look at that wider footprint. So that was our starting point. Then as we apply the tree tree mitigation, that's where we're looking at alternative designs to minimize or avoid tree impacts.
Are the foundations for these structures, both the single and double, within the Caltrain right of way, the foundations?
In Atherton, yes.
Yes.
And what,
And the majority of the other court.
what are
corridor
the two sizes of the foundation?
The typical is 36 inch for a single track cantilever, and it's 42 inch for a double track cantilever.
Well, I would like to go.
That's diameter?
That's diameter, that's correct.
I'm assuming the cost, because a bigger foundation is usually, it's not linear, it's usually like exponential. That's a broad generalization, but is the cost from your guys' perspective like roughly the same with a two singles versus one double?
I would have to double check it. It's not the same. It's certainly not the same, because the other thing to consider is a double track cantilever foundation is deeper than a single track, because of the rows.
So it might even be more expensive.
Correct. But there's trade-offs, right? There's, in terms of 6 inches difference, you got 2 foundations versus 1. It's not an exact science, but there is a difference in cost.
Because you could be on both sides of the track. You have twice as much labor moving the equipment from one side to the other.
Even if not materials sometimes.
I've got a question about the allowable overhang of the trees. I imagine we have trees that are higher than 35 feet, and there are probably trees that are higher than 46 feet. Now, does the overhang of the tree have to be pruned back to the same line, whether the pole's 35 or 46?
Yes.
Yes.
The electric safety zone is defined in the California Public Utility Commission's operating rules for our corridor, so it's specific because there's no 25 kV system in California. So that essentially is whatever is the outermost electrified component 10 feet from there. And it kind of is a horizontal line all the way up, because there can't be any overhang.
So it can't overhang the wires?
That's right.
Okay.
So
We've heard words. I'm not sure whether Narissa said them or you said them, that the double poles, the smaller 32-foot poles with just smaller cantilevers, was A, preferred, and B, cheaper.
That's what Lynn said in a meeting on
It is preferred.
11/15.
It is preferred.
And it might be
Cheaper, probably have to double check. I don't know. The trade-off between 2 versus 1 is something we have to
So,
check.
well, but even the word preferred, it seems to me is relevant, because if you prefer those, and we sure as hell prefer those,
yeah.
how can we move forward and make both of us get what we want?
I was gonna say, I think what the purpose of this meeting, or this particular topic, is the city council is looking for a recommendation.
That's right.
So it seems like we should, given that it sounds like everyone with an interest in the outcome here, it sounds like they want the 2 single solution. It
The
sounds
two
like-
30-footers.
Yeah. it
Yeah,
seems
the
like-
46
The other
foot.
factor is, I mean, and even if it may be a small number, and I think it's maybe a bit subjective in terms of the tree impacts and, you know, if that offsets what the pole heights are, that is a board policy. And so that's the other consideration that we have to take into place. So, you know, that's something, just as if a council, you know, gave direction to staff, same kind of thing is, you know, we take that, we don't take that lightly. And so that was the implementation here, that's the other factor. And then I think just, so.
I'm sorry, Stacy, I don't know,
Yeah.
but could you repeat that?
So you remember the aesthetic measure that you cited, the
AES
mitigation?
2B.
That's right.
Yes.
So there's, the one that I'm talking about is biology 5.
Right.
And so that is to minimize, reduce or avoid any tree impacts. And so the outside poles, while they may be preferred from an operational or financial perspective, we also have this third component that we're implementing, which is our board direction. So we've adopted that. Also, the Federal Transit Administration has adopted that as well. So I'm just laying things out just so we all have all of the pieces to the puzzle. And then the other element is, well, maybe not always fun to talk about, even if the pole comparison from outside poles and compared to double is cheaper, there's still going to be a change to the contractor. So that's a changed condition based on what was in the RFP, because what we've done is identify the double track cantilever to minimize the tree impact. So I want everyone to be informed of kind of all the factors and,
Sure.
you know, wherever your recommendation to the council lands is just kind of where we're coming from too, and so there's, you know, no surprises, so I just
So,
wanna lay that out
I
there.
just-
What is the status of the design work on Atherton now?
So we have 65%, so it would be a change to the design.
Do we have copies of that
We are
design?
setting up a meeting with Mike, and that's per our, you know, agreement and commitment is to come and share that information. So we were working to schedule a meeting in parallel with the city agreement, and then we wanted to see how these conversations were going.
That's the
but
January 18th meeting.
that's a different meeting, so that's
Okay.
a public meeting. There's gonna be a separate staff level meeting with our technical folks and Mike and
Okay.
whomever he wants to bring to review the 65% plans.
Yeah, so getting back to what Stacy just said, just as far as expectations, so stated a little different way is that the city council is very interested in the recommendation of this committee. Based on that, the city council is gonna make a request to Caltrain. Caltrains may or may not comply with the city council's request, because assuming the request is the preference is a single track cantilever, because that would be a design change over, you know, and there could be additional costs. So that's still gonna be a Caltrain decision, it's not gonna be a city council decision.
But the design is at 65 now, there has to be a 95% design. I presume that has not been done yet.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. It will need to get progressed to 95% and eventually issued.
So every time you reissue it, you introduce changes. This would be one of a number of changes that are introduced in the design between those two design points, would it not?
Yeah, and you can certainly introduce it in between the different iterations of design. It is still a change from
Yes,
the base
well, I
condition.
understand that, but, you know, it's
Sure.
the design process is an evolving thing.
It's better to have a request.
And you'd like to make rigid decisions, as few as you have to, early in the process, because you want to allow the flexibility to introduce improvements that you recognize should be used.
Yeah, especially because this is the first time the public has seen it that live here locally, so that this is only the first time they could provide comment and say, hey, we're not going where we think we should be going.
It's the first time the city council saw it.
Yeah, the first time the city council's seen it.
Yeah, so, and I agree, and I hear you. I think the challenge is trying to balance, what we have agreed to with all the cities is an informational review, where poles and infrastructure are in our right of way, versus things for input where we have an overbridge protection. We don't have that in Atherton, but somewhere where we're putting a screen or we're seeking an encroachment permit that's something within the city limits outside of the right of way. So while this is gonna be the first time that you're seeing 65% for the infrastructure in our right of way, it's an informational review. We're happy to take comments, but just, again, trying to set expectations and how we've talked about this, through the length of the project.
I
Are
think it's
aesthetics
important, I think
a
it's,
factor to be considered?
Yes,
Yes,
those were
they are.
evaluated as
You
part of
can't
the environmental.
quantify aesthetics.
That's right,
They're
it's a very subjective.
I think,
A factor to be considered.
yes.
Yes,
I think
and
it's-
we feel that we sufficiently did as part of our EIR, process. I know that we agree to disagree on that point, but, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, it's better to be at 65 versus 95 and asking for a change, so.
Well, absolutely. I mean, changes will happen after 95 when they're out in the field. They're gonna find things they didn't expect to find. I mean, that's the nature of the construction business. That will be there. There's,
And I think to Paul's point, what's important here is timing. When I met with Lynn on November 15th, what he said is that these foundations are coming to Atherton in early January. So we don't have a lot of time. And at that time, at that meeting, it was stated that the standard for the corridor are the two 30-foot poles. They're not, if with respect to saving trees, this is not going to be the Caltrain corridor. It's not, these massive poles are not going up from one end of the corridor to the other to save 2 feet of pruning on one side. This is what's going up on the corridor. This is what is pictured in the environmental impact report. This came as a, if you listen to the video recording of the November 15th council meeting, you'll hear every city council member and staff say that they were completely surprised, had no knowledge of these poles whatsoever, had no knowledge of a pole greater than 30 feet in height.
We're circling here. Stacy, do you and Lynn have any more information to bring us?
Not that I can think of.
Lynn, we'd like to excuse you.
Okay.
And
Before they're
we'll
excused,
beat
could I
this
bring
out
up
among ourselves.
another subject?
Sure.
And that is the interoperability of the positive control system between electric, diesel, on both passenger and freight. Where do you stand on that? Have you found anywhere in the country or in the world where they operate electric trains and diesel trains on the same right-of-way? Has it ever been done?
So, I would say, it is still something that we are working on as a part of the contract, as part of the design of the contract. The contract is required to come up with the solution for, operating the signal system, the grade crossings, not only for the electrical trains, the Caltrain fleet, but also for our tenants and also for the freight vehicles. That's a contract requirement. Above that, we're currently just working on the different options that are potentially a solution. We're diligently working our way through that part of it. There is not, I believe, I'm not sure if there's an apples to apples comparison. I know folks have brought up in the past Denver as a kind of comparison. There are some differences in how the Denver system is laid out compared to the Caltrain system.
Is LTK taking the lead in that work now?
This is under about Barbados contract. LTK is a consultant to Caltrain, but not specifically on this issue.
Are they working on CBOS?
LTK is working on CBOS as part of the CBOS team, yes.
Okay.
It seems to me it behooves Caltrain to find out if this challenge has been met successfully, first anywhere in the country, and second anywhere in the world. And if it has not been met in the country, then you've got one set of problems. You might find somebody in Europe that's done it and you could emulate them. But if it hasn't been done anywhere, it seems to me you're really up the creek.
Understand.
So you ought to find out
So,
who's done it.
yeah, so I think we don't have all of the details, but what I can say is we have a team of folks that are paying very close attention to this and meeting regularly, both on the PCEP, our project team, and with Balfour. So we hear you, and we can't agree more that we're not gonna run a system that's not safe and doesn't have a functioning signal system. So I don't know what that solution is right now. But there's no way we legally could run if we didn't have a functioning signal system. FRA wouldn't allow that.
But you could put up the poles and wires first before you find out. Couldn't you?
Yep.
True. I don't think we want that.
I understand
I'll
your
just
point
turn
of
it
view.
on.
Yeah.
This is not an issue, Jack, that we're gonna resolve here tonight. We're not here to embarrass these folks. They've been good enough to come
Oh,
over
you're
and
gonna have
sit
to
with
try
us.
a lot harder than that, my friends.
So I had a question, but I'm not sure if it's a Caltrain question. The Quadgate study, was that for Caltrain doing, or, no, that was HSL?
High-speed rail.
Okay, so you guys are off the hook for my question.
Oh, okay.
I would just say one thing. A comment about, sort of it's testified that the board can make a decision what they want to do if it's their right of way. And when we can think about what's involved here, they administered, but the money that has bought this, which is the right of way, is from all of us. Measure A provided $500 million to the train. We provide this town $500,000 every year through our taxes. And so to me, the concept that it's all right for Caltrain to make the decision because they own the right of way, it's our money we're talking about. It seems to me we are the ones that are impacted. We're the ones that are providing the money for it. We ought to be the ones that really make the ultimate decisions unless there's some mechanical reasons why it doesn't work. But it is our money. It's ours. I understand how the title goes. When we put all the money in, we put a title as the Samtrans. It came through the Transportation Authority, through the Measure A. The reason it wasn't in the TA is because we're not a permanent, it has to be renewed. Samtrans is because they came before the law changed. So that's where the title is. But it's our money, and it's our land, and we ought to be the ultimate decision about how our land is used. It's our money that has put that in. As I say, for us, $500,000 every year for 20 years, the first 20 years of this. And I think that is important. I mean, I hear the comment about, it's their right of way and all. It's not their money, it's our money.
Yeah, and I didn't mean it to say we do whatever we want. I think the challenge is we have funding coming in from a lot of different sources and a lot of different stakeholders, and they have a lot of different opinions about the electrification and just things in general that Caltrain is doing. And so I think at the staff level, what we're trying best to balance is these overall board policies and directions specific to the electrification project, and how do we involve and coordinate with the cities, which is why we're trying to find that middle ground of sharing information, but also building a project that's been a priority for the JPB for 20 plus years. And so I didn't mean to sound dismissive at all. That was not my intent. It's just that balance of all the various stakeholders and funding partners.
You should be aware that Malcolm played a major role in securing that right-of-way for Caltrain, personally. So he knows of what he speaks there.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
We appreciate you coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So was that all of 5B?
No, now we have to decide what we're going to send off to
Oh, yeah, hello. Yeah.
the council, and not in front of them.
Yeah.
So does anybody know where this one red tree is that gets removed in the trees from?
Well, you got a scale at the bottom, 50 feet.
No, that it's the same tree.
I think it changes from year.
I know, but
It's
there's one that gets removed
Yeah,
Oh,
with
is
the
it?
side poles that doesn't get removed with the
No,
two
it's
track
pruned.
cantilever.
It's just, yeah, this is red and
Yeah,
then
it's
it's
a
yellow.
Red.
Because
No,
that's
if you look at their chart,
yeah, I know
I
the
think that
chart.
there's
one tree that gets
Yes,
removed,
I
and
know
it must be
there's
that red one.
Okay.
There's that one, and there are those two, and that one is the same one.
Yeah, but see there, in the bottom, which is the two-track cantilever,
Yeah.
it's orange, it's more than 25% pruning. It becomes removed,
That looks awfully red to me.
well, that's red.
Okay.
Or if you have a Google map, you
It
can
does look
probably
red.
match it.
It is red.
It is red,
Yes,
yeah.
in the
No,
top.
both of them.
No, I think the
One's
bottom
orange.
one's
No,
orange.
one's orange, the top one's red. I assume that's the one that gets removed, but I'm just curious as to where it is.
But it would be yellow if it were just more than 25%.
Oh, actually, you could count the number of property lines of
Well,
each
I
property.
think the,
It's like the
I don't think the
third
color
house
didn't
down.
come through very well on this.
No,
on this
they
thing.
certainly didn't.
I think that
The legend.
this was only produced today. Prior to this, there was no count of, there was no analysis that had been done about the impact of the 46-foot poles. Honestly, I don't know where it is.
Do you think these are the individual lot lines that show
Yes.
on the white?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. It looks like it.
All right, well,
You could count it off.
You
You
could
have
practically
you have
count
the
it off,
border
yeah.
of North
Yeah,
Fair
you
Oaks
can
and
figure it
Atherton
out.
on the left side, so you can count it off going over.
Okay, the issue before us is what we should recommend to the council. And it seems that it has focused to the point where we either want to recommend that the that they accept the two-track cantilever poles or that they not accept them. Has the town signed the agreement with Caltrain yet?
No.
Good. And that's our leverage.
Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, when you take a look at this, and so maybe I can give an update, because that's the next thing, is this PCEP agreement. All that agreement talks to is, it just kind of lays out roles and responsibilities. Whether or not the town signs it or not, to me, has nothing to do with, I mean, Caltrain's gonna move on with the project.
Well, except that they don't have access to our land until they get the agreement, do
They
they?
don't need access to our land.
No, they're in the right of way.
But they want the staging area, as I understand it. They want a staging area for
They've
construction.
identified a potential staging area which is within their right of way.
Oh, okay. Well, then we don't have a lever on them.
No, and
What
in
does
fact,
PCEP stand for?
Peninsula
Corridor
Corridor Electrification
Electrification.
Project.
So
So
that's
basically
all,
the project.
doesn't tell us a whole lot.
Well,
What is the purpose of the agreement that they want us to sign?
Well, I believe the purpose, again, it just lays out roles and responsibilities. From the town perspective, you know, one of the things that we will get as part of that agreement is number one, if they choose to use any of our roads as a haul route. Well, typically what the agreement said is that if they do any damage, they'll repair it. What's in our agreement is that, no, if you use any of the town's roads for haul routes, you will slurry seal it after you're done. Another item is that any type of traffic control that they need on El Camino Real, what all the other agreements say is that cities have the ability to review, you know, and not approve, because El Camino Real is a state highway, so cities can't approve anything there anyway. But what we got as part of our agreement is that the town gets to review and approve. So in other words, if there's any type of traffic control on El Camino Real within the limits of the town has approval authority. And the rationale for that is any type of traffic control, if there's any issues, where they're gonna go onto the town's residential street. So that's why we're pretty adamant, no, we understand this isn't the town's road, we have no jurisdictional control, but we want approval authority, and that's within the agreement. The other thing is, it's relatively minor in the context of things, is that, you know, what this agreement establishes for all of the cities along the corridor is the ability to basically get reimbursed for any staff time that's required. So in other words, for this 65% review, if this were in place, the town would get reimbursed for staff time necessary to do that. Even having, you know, the meeting that I had with them yesterday to go over the tree information that they shared with this committee tonight, if that agreement were in place, the town would get reimbursed for staff time to do that. In the context of things, it's minor, but as I take a look at what's in the agreement, to me, the reality is that by not signing the agreement, it doesn't have any impact on Caltrain's ability to deliver their project.
Well, may I ask a question about that? Because I was told by somebody far more knowledgeable than myself that Caltrain wanted to have this staging area, which you had mentioned the last meeting. And the staging area you'd mentioned was between the tracks and the right-of-way. So why is that going to be then, why do they need to put that in the agreement with Atherton? Do they want to supply that by the roads? Do they want to, are they supplying that strictly by train, or are they going to supply that and resupply that and remove things on the roadway?
That staging area is in that agreement. Where the staging area came up is, I can't, but it's
I was told
identified,
it was.
it was identified somewhere.
I see, I was
But-
told it was.
But yeah, and it was just identified as a potential staging area, really for storage.
Where's that?
Where they identified, it's basically within the right of way, between Watkins and the station. You know, but again, it would be
Quite a long area.
wholly within the.
That's
the
on
right
this
of way.
side of the right of way?
It would probably have
I
to be.
don't know.
There's not a
This
lot of
side
room.
the tracks, rather.
It would probably be on this side, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On
because
west side.
their right of way extends onto a portion of the, where people.
Yeah, there's not much room on the east side, so
Yeah.
I would imagine have to be on the west
There's
side.
very little on
They
this
could
side.
potentially use their row at the station. So there is a row of parking along the rail.
That's true, yeah.
That's their row, so they could use that area and utilize it for staging. Station's not open during the week.
But it's a good question how they're gonna bring the material in. If they
Right.
bring the material in by road, it'll
Right.
come on our road.
Right.
And that is one of the concerns where Mike said we wanted to have more control of
Right.
where that path and where that pattern was gonna be and what was gonna be left.
Yeah.
But at this point also, and it's stated in the agreement, is what they've been saying is that the construction actually is gonna be done from the tracks.
Mm.
So it's not like they're gonna be bringing in drill rigs from a road, driving down the track to drill, you know, for the foundations. All the construction will be off of basically a customized railroad car
Yeah.
that drills, pours concrete, and so, so the need for any type of haul route, I'm not sure why they would need it. But, again, our approach was to try to identify things to deter them from wanting to utilize the town's road versus someone else's roads.
Well, still, the material has to be delivered to their work unit. That is still going to have to come either by rail or by road.
Correct, but given that there's really only two roads that they can use here within the town, that they
Yeah.
can access their right of way. But again, our approach was to do things to try to discourage that, you know, to choose a road in Menlo Park or a road in Redwood City or San Mateo County.
Okay, well, that's an aside to the issue that we're working on here. Let's get back to the overhead pole structures.
So when you guys are making this decision, just keep in mind that there is a tree component attached to it, so Stacy provided that, so when you're making the decision, take that in consideration while you're, so that we know you guys have considered it.
Is there any more discussion? Can we have a motion on this?
I move that we recommend to the council that the town of Atherton wants 30-foot pole nominal 30-foot poles. We do not want 46-foot high double-track cantilever poles.
Yeah, I would second that with modifications. They recommend use of the single track cantilevers rather than the double track.
Can you
Well,
add
that's
language
the-
about trees?
Yeah, with the understanding
And
that
with
the
the
trees-
understanding that there may be a slightly greater impact on trees as described in the report handed out by Caltrain staff.
But overall aesthetics would be better, something
Yeah,
like that.
Right.
the overall,
I mean, can we describe the impact on the trees as de minimis?
We will this will
I
probably be
think it
forwarded
is.
as well.
It's in the eyes of the beholder as always, but I would say that.
I mean, well, presumably we'll have one sentence that says what we want, and then there'll be a paragraph with a couple of sentences in it that says why. I mean, I don't know what form these letters take. Is it just a single resolution that we send, or do we send a resolution with some backup?
Oh, I don't know that you need, all I'm interested in is what the recommendation of this committee is, kind of the rationale behind that.
yeah.
Okay,
well,
so
it's-
there is a
it's on the
rationale
top.
there. So if the rationale is that our preference is based on the fact that these double track cantilever poles represent a aesthetic harm to the neighborhood in return for a de minimis reduction in tree.
You got that, Mike?
I'll get my dictionary out.
I like that.
You sure those are all words?
I would definitely convey
Yeah.
the.
So I think we got a first and a second, and so we can vote, or
Any further discussion?
any further
discussion?
discussion?
All in favor of the
Just-
motion is?
Well,
Jim, did you want to say something?
Discussion, Jim.
yeah, I don't mind discussing. I'm offended that Caltrain made this decision without even, before they even had this chart showing what the impact on the trees was. And then they come along later and try to justify it with some put-up job of tree impact, which I think is shameful.
Put
Thank you.
that in the discussion with the decision.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There, we got it.
Now, when is this gonna be presented? Tomorrow or
Yeah.
2 weeks from tomorrow?
No, it's gonna be at the December
20th.
December
20th.
City council meeting.
City Council meeting.
Okay.
So it's not gonna be discussed tomorrow?
No.
Yeah.
There is a meeting tomorrow,
Yeah.
so 4 o'clock meeting on berms and things.
No, what the meeting, it's a study session of the city council. There's 3 items on the agenda. One, there's gonna be a presentation by Cal Water. The second item, they're gonna discuss Mayor Keith's letter regarding the grade separation. And the third thing is a discussion about some budget adjustments
Parcel
as a
tax.
result of the parcel tax. And so, the police department will talk about, impacts, and then what I'll be presenting is information on the capital improvement program of what, adjustments need to be made as a result of the, parcel tax.
Was there gonna be a discussion on whether there should be a parcel tax election in June?
That's, I don't know, we're just gonna be talking about the budget.
I think that would be up to the council.
No, I'm gonna make public comments on 3 points on that discussion, but I just wondered whether it was on the agenda or whether it wasn't. Because one of the members told me that they were gonna discuss the parcel tax, but they didn't say, whether it's just the effect or whether they're gonna have another go at it or not.
No, I think that, and in fact, there's a staff report, so if you go online, see the agenda, there's a staff report attached, so that will tell you what you're thinking of.
Thanks, Greg. Now I gotta avoid everybody all day tomorrow.
All right. Okay, the 65% design review, that is when now?
We haven't scheduled it yet, but the 65% design review is complete. I got an email from Caltrain today.
The design is complete?
Yes,
Okay.
to go through the 65% design. And so it probably won't happen until early January, but I'll let you know.
I'd like to attend that if I may. Okay, community meeting, January 18th.
And all this is just a series of meetings that Caltrain, it's an informational meeting that Caltrain is having. I'm not sure with every community on, along the peninsula, but they are having one here in the town of Atherton. That's gonna occur on, January 18th. It's gonna be at the Jennings Pavilion in Hobart Palmer Park.
What time?
It's gonna be from 6 PM to 7 PM. Once we get more of a notification from Caltrain, we'll post it on the town's website, and I'm sure Caltrain is going to advertise it somehow.
The purpose of the meeting is
Just-
feedback, or they're telling us something about,
I'm sure they're welcome, they're gonna get feedback, but it's really more about, kind of the, current status of the project. And hopefully they'll talk about, now that they're getting, they're underway with construction, what type of impacts there is, what they've, what they're experiencing, given that all the construction is gonna be happening between, 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. So,
I wonder if anyone from this group attended the Redwood City meeting and can tell us what the tenor of that meeting was.
Well, I think the meeting is an opportunity to throw rocks if you want to throw some, because it will be a public meeting.
it will be a public meeting, and that's why we wanted to have it at the pavilion, versus this room, not knowing how many residents are.
I mean, it would be appropriate for you to bring up the CBOS thing at that meeting, Chad.
And it's also a good time to show how many people the rail committee and the town is in support of the rail component, because they do report those numbers back to the LPMG and the DA and everybody else. So if there's only 2 people in the audience, which often happens, what do you think they think?
So we're all
Exactly.
encouraged to attend.
Right.
And bring our friends and neighbors.
Yes.
Dogs,
pretty good list.
dogs, cats, and turtles.
So have some free alcohol. I guarantee
Oh, there we
you,
go.
everyone from Menlo College will be there discussing the importance of rail and to the community of Atherton.
I wanted to point out an anniversary. Today, Paul, is the 1-year anniversary of the meeting we had last December 6th. Today's December 5. But Mr. Guan attended, Stacy Cock attended at last year this very meeting, the December meeting. And I asked, because I went back and studied it on the video, please tell us about what your plans are for the constant warning time replacement system. And that was when Mr. Guan said that Caltrain was lucky to have hired Balfour Beatty, the firm that had just completed that in Denver. So it's
Well,
kind
he's
of
not-
what goes around comes around.
He's not saying that anymore.
No, it's quite different tonight.
He's learned something. Okay,
For the record,
yes,
on tomorrow's council meeting, what the agenda says is to address Mr. Collins' question, review the town's capital improvement project priorities, address revenue shortfalls due to the loss of the special parcel tax, review planned revenue solutions, and provide feedback.
And one of the planned revenue solutions, as I understand it from Alex,
Go ahead.
is to remove the $100,000 study for the quad gates at Watkins.
Yeah, that's in the city manager's report.
that's an obvious thing to do, because that money is sitting there and it's not being used.
Well, I think that we should go just the opposite and advocate that they increase that amount. But I missed the discussion, the first 5 minutes tonight, about this quad gates, but if that's,
The Menlo Park
Yeah.
ladies want quad gates at all
Menlo
of their
Park.
all of their grade crossings.
well, that would call for Watkins to do it, we'd have 5 or 6 of them
Yeah,
in a
that's
quiet
right.
zone.
That's right.
So I can speak more about that during our discussion closer to the end of the meeting, because I went to the Menlo Park and the Palo Alto recent rail meetings in which they had public participation, also city council discussion, so I can provide some more details when we get to that
Why
point.
don't you bring that up now, Alex?
Oh, okay, sure. So, on October 10th, Menlo Park was discussing plans for what are they gonna do with the rail corridor in terms of grade separation. As you probably guys know, they got Measure A money to do a study, and that's the only money they got was to do the study. They don't know where the money to actually do the grade separation will come from, but you do the study first and then you see what you can get later, and sometimes you get a little pie in the sky in terms of what you're asking for. And so they've come down to 2 alternatives. I think most of you have heard this before.
No.
Alternative A is just one grade separation at Ravenswood, and then alternative C, because there used to be a B for another option, was 3 grade separations, Ravenswood, Oak Grove, and Glenwood. And during this meeting, it was brought up, can we do grade separation of Encinal as well? And so The staff had not looked at that because what the staff was instructed to do by the city council about 2 years ago or so, they said, hey, you can only look at things that only affect within Menlo Park. You can't touch Palo Alto, can't touch Atherton, because I think they didn't want to get into talking with other cities and slowing down the process. They wanted to get the study done as quickly as possible, which they didn't do, but that was their intent. And the reason why is because there's a time dependency on this. They want to complete the study because when they complete the study, then they can go for money. Because right now, San Mateo is doing a 25th Avenue grade separation. They've eaten up the rest, pretty much the rest, maybe not all, of the Measure A money. Now, then you got Burlingame ahead of Menlo Park, and they're going to ask for money, but no one knows where that's going to come from. And so third in line, or next in line, is Menlo Park, assuming they get the study done in time, because there is another city, Redwood City, who wants to grade separate the northernmost rail crossing that's not grade separate. I can't remember the... Whipple, yes. They're asking for some money to do a study on Whipple. So, you know, they're going to, if they get it done in time, they could go ahead of Menlo Park. So Menlo Park is interested in getting this done. So during this meeting, it was brought up, hey, can we grade separate Encinal? And so Mayor Keith said, oh, you know, I looked on Atherton's page, the rail committee doesn't have a position on whether grade separation is okay or not. So that's why they sent the mail to Mayor Lempres about, is Atherton interested in this? And so that's kind of why the HOA from Felton Gables came, because they don't want it. They think a quiet zone is better. And I'm inclined to agree with them because the project Menlo Park wants is going to take 5 years to do, and it's probably going to take another 5 years minimum to find the funding, do all the planning. So you're talking about a decade minimum. That's, you know, if you find the money by the time you finish all the planning. But it'll probably take longer, especially if one city is asking for 3 grade separations and every other city is not asking for as much as Menlo Park. So
it may be of interest that 50 years ago, Menlo Park had the money to grade separate Ravenswood, and they didn't do it.
Oh, they didn't? Okay. Wow. Now they wish they did.
Now they wish they did.
But at least from my perspective, I feel safety and noise-wise, you probably get pretty close to a grade separation if you do quad gates in a quiet zone without probably 1/100th of the cost and much more minimized time. And you wouldn't be spending all of Carrie's time and Mike's time dealing with Caltrain on a large decade-long project. Instead, they could do something like a quiet zone within a year or two. So it'd be much simpler.
If they do their major plan there, they're going to have to rip out all the electrification on those lines.
Yes.
And pile a lot of dirt there and do it all over again.
Yeah.
Why do it once when you can do it 2 times when someone else is paying for it, right? So that was it. That was at that meeting. People asked why they didn't do a viaduct, and staff had not looked at viaduct because of costs, but it seemed that a lot of Menlo Park residents wanted a viaduct because it would look better. A viaduct is, basically right now they have a plan for just a wall. Basically a wall all along the rail corridor. Or viaduct is open.
It'll be a berm, it won't
be a berm, I'm sorry, it'll be a berm.
No.
It'll be a berm.
It'll look just like Belmont and San Carlos.
Exactly. Whereas a viaduct you can actually see through it. So that's what Menlo Park prefers, but it's going to be more expensive.
Wasn't even on the agenda, was it?
No, but I have something interesting from Palo Alto on that. I can talk to you guys about. The tunnel's not being considered, I think, mostly because of the 2 creeks on either side, San Francisco and Atherton Channel. And to be able to do a tunnel, you'd have to get underneath even those and then get back up to grade. And so it would be quite an expensive project. And then you definitely have to get Palo Alto's approval and Atherton's approval. And I think we would be for it, but again, the money, it'd be very, very expensive. Oh, build underground the rail.
Just for the Palo Alto intersection or the whole?
No, the whole thing in Menlo Park.
Right.
And the other problem is freight can't go underground unless you have very good ventilation. So it'd probably have to be an open area, and so a trench. But then you still need to get under the creek.
They do a trench on the English Channel. It's 25 miles.
But they don't have freight that takes that still runs on diesel.
It's all electrified.
Yeah.
It's all electric.
If UP ever goes electrified, then you could do that, but you can't because of the diesel fumes and the danger of that underground.
There are no diesel fumes on the English Channel?
No, it's all electric.
So let's see what else. Mountain View is also, I think they're very close to deciding Castro is going to close that rail crossing, just for you guys' information. Let's see. California has recognized Caltrain corridor as a statewide significance, so that Menlo Park thinks maybe some money will come from that. And it's actually possible for Menlo Park to grade separate Encinal without impacting Atherton. The problem is that it would require significant property impacts, including eminent domain of some of those residential properties nearby. And so the council of Menlo Park doesn't want to touch that because of eminent domain, but it is indeed possible. They just don't want to deal with that kind of political fallout that could occur from that. And then back to Jack's question about Palo Alto and undergrounding. Palo Alto actually is doing a study of that, and they have a current draft up on their website. So if you want to hear the numbers, I've got them here. Trench, 2.4 to 2.9 billion, and I can send you the link, Jack. Cut and cover, 3.3 to 4 billion. Twin bores, 2.8 to 3.4 billion. Or if you just want to do individual grade separations, they're 100 million to 200 million each. So basically an order of magnitude of times 10 or more.
Numbers, what point do they start and stop?
I think this is for the entire Palo Alto.
San Antonio,
the whole length.
The whole length. Yeah, I think so. I can't remember exactly, but I think
Well,
it's in
it is.
Oh, you've seen
The
it.
Alma crossing jumps up and down in their plans because that's right next to the creek.
And Palo Alto's logic is
And of course,
that they can
university is already grade
reutilize the
separated,
land above the
as
rail.
is
Yeah.
That's
Embarcadero.
their-
So it really goes Churchill south is the big consideration.
I think they do have a case for reusing the land if it's in the downtown area, but if it's residential,
It's problematic.
it's problematic.
That's
Whatever
where
happened
obviously
to
high
high-speed
density
rail?
housing.
Yes, I'm sure the neighbors want that. I think they'll say, bring the rail
Well,
back.
But with those
Great
numbers, they're gonna have to
high-speed
come up with
rails
something.
still
Yeah.
talks
Well, I don't
a
think it's gonna
good
happen.
game,
No.
that they're gonna have all the money in the world and they're gonna do all these things, but there's no evidence that they're doing anything about it.
Was that guy still got a job?
Ben Tripulsis, apparently.
Yeah, I saw him last week.
Oh,
Still
did
got a
it?
job.
Okay.
Or is he still preaching that he's gonna quad gate every intersection?
He mentions you every time I see him.
Does he have any substance to his mentioning? Money or when or how?
Dreams.
No, they don't have any of those things. It's
Well, what is our thinking on quad gates at Watkins? Because if the city council wants, or the town council wants to take that money and put it someplace
Well,
else.
$100,000 won't go very far on quad gating.
It'll
Watkins.
probably cost 1 to 2 million to do quad gates.
Well, and what the 100,000 was there, what the purpose
for
of
planning.
it was to hire a consultant to get a budget, level cost estimate of what it would cost. And so that was the purpose. But because high-speed rail, that is part of the scope of high-speed rail, is to put quad gates at grade crossings. The cost of quad gates is being studied as part of the environmental document, okay? So we're gonna be utilizing the results of that study to develop our budget level cost estimate of what a quad gate. So, in essence, because high-speed rail is doing that as part of the environmental studies, which, it takes a long time, and it's taking longer than we said, but it equates to a savings of.
Not to
Well,
be-
it's been
not-
postponed
not-
indefinitely,
Not to be a
correct?
damper, but this is not on the agenda.
Yeah.
Say that again.
It's not on the agenda.
I'm gonna send you the Brown Act, the book.
Well, maybe send a prosecutor.
She's like sweat when you're around, Greg.
One last thing, and I'll shut up. The Managers Mobility Partnership, maybe I'll shut up, which includes the staff of Menlo Park, Redwood City, Stanford, Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. They are discussing to formalize cooperation on grade separation along all the entire corridors, just so that you guys know. So,
Who's doing that?
the Managers Mobility Partnership. These are all the city managers of Menlo Park, Redwood City, whoever's the equivalent of Stanford at Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. They usually discuss transportation issues, but they're going to formalize cooperation on grade separation issues. And one of the reasons why is I think it's called Measure B in Santa Clara County passed, and about $700 million is available there for grade separation. So there's a strong interest in doing that. Stanford's going to build a whole bunch of new buildings over the next 18 years, and so people are afraid that traffic's going to be terrible over that. So they're thinking of like, how can we make traffic better? One is the grade separation.
Well, if Redwood City and Menlo Park are both in it, it seems to me they're missing Atherton.
It depends if we're interested in grade separation, and I think we may not necessarily be.
We're probably not on the top of the list.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, there's no point in spending our energy and our effort and our money in trying to find a grandiose solution that is not going to happen anyway. It seems sort of throwing good money after bad.
Yeah. And back to the money question, Menlo Park probably can convince state and county funds to be spent on Ravenswood to be grade separated, but they're going to have a really hard time convincing them on the other two. They're going to tell them it's not enough traffic, and there it's pretty basic black and white. Is they look at the traffic, is it going to be a lead spending on these three versus putting the money for Redwood City or Burlingame instead? So that's going to be what Menlo Park's going to run into, and hopefully they'll come to their senses and say, okay, grade separate Ravenswood, and then we'll quad gate the other three. Atherton will quad gate itself, and then we'll have a continuous quiet zone, which will be much better for everyone living close to the rail.
I can't imagine Atherton ever being interested in grade separation. When Measure A first passed, in the expenditure plan, we laid out how money's going to be spent, and we allocated a large amount for grade separation, and it was going to be a priority basis. We didn't have anybody who wanted it. I mean, there was anybody who wanted that money could have had it, because nobody was interested.
Well, I thought Bill Royer and somebody else put it on the ballot, $20 million to grade separate the whole line.
I don't know about that.
That won't go very far.
No, this was 50 years ago.
Yeah, maybe 50 years ago that would have gone really far.
Well, that was enough to do it.
But where it has worked is in commercial areas. I mean, we did Fifth Avenue, for example, and that was all commercial in there. We knocked out a lot of property and a lot of buildings, but they didn't care about that. When San Carlos and Belmont came together, the reason they put the two together was it saves money and you're not going up and down, and they favored it. I have to tell you, I've never seen a project that brought about more opposition and complaints and anger than that, because it really impacts all those. Can you imagine if you're in a residential now, if you're a commercial, it doesn't matter. I mean, I remember in the Dumbarton days when Redwood City had a very development-oriented council, they had plans, I got the drawings for it, to double deck Woodside Road, and that was all commercial, so it wasn't going to impact residences, but all the way from 101 up to El Camino was going to be double deck, and they justified that because that's when Costco came in, and they said, well, that'll generate much more traffic. They also, which was good for us, we were going to extend Bayfront up to Woodside Road, that was Highway 84, and we would make it more difficult to come off of Bay Road, if you come over the Dumbarton into the Marsh Road turnoff. So we had a turn lane there, and we had a flow through traffic up to Redwood City, to Woodside Road, and they favored that. They wanted it. Then the council changed. You had a more concerned about residences and all. But grade separations are appropriate in some cases. To me, the only ones I've observed where we were involved is if it is commercial. The closest one right here, of course, was the Fifth Avenue. And that was good for them. It alleviated some of the problems. But we knocked out a lot of properties and businesses and buildings, but they were commercial. And they got more money than it was worth anyway in the market, so they were happy about it. We were happy. As I mentioned, San Carlos, Belmont, they were very unhappy with that. And it's ugly and not appropriate for residential areas. So I can't visualize anything where we would, as a community, residential community, ever find it to our benefit to do grade separation.
Well, and why wouldn't the Menlo Park people go up and look at that and talk to some of the people up there that are living with it? That seems completely illogical.
Well, that community was very divided over that issue for a long time, going way back, and there were those who wanted it it's,
Yeah, I think even within the Menlo Park community, there might be a divide with those who live near the rail, who would be more impacted by the visual issues, and those who just need to get cross town, who live farther away from the rail, who say, I just need to be able to get cross town. I'm tired of waiting for the train. If and when high-speed rail comes, the gates will be down all the time, and it's already bad enough now to get onto 101 and Dumbarton.
And as
with the
Facebook gets bigger and bigger and bigger,
it gets worse. So
it starts to tip.
They're trying to figure out, like, how can we make it, you know, a little bit better.
Fair Oaks Lane's pretty bad, huh?
Yes, it is.
With the downtime what it is. Marsh Road's impossible.
And in all perspective, that's good. So what you're saying is bad to every other jurisdiction. They're far worse than we're the ones getting the residual.
Willow's terrible.
Yeah,
Willow
believe me,
disaster.
we don't even want to go down traffic. We'll be here all night.
Are there other comments by committee members that you would like to make?
I still feel somehow we should do something on the quad gates. If we don't agree with them, then we should tell the council that we don't. If we agree with them, we should tell the council we agree with them.
Should we put it on next agenda for our next rail committee meeting?
Well, I think they're gonna decide that next.
No, it's a study session. They won't change the budget at that meeting. They'll just talk about it.
But I mean, what they're going to decide is whether they want to do grade separation at Watkins and/or participate in changing the grade. Quad gates can be a separately discussed issue, and then we can make a recommendation.
Well, I'm concerned about the safety. I mean, that's always been my issue, and you know, the faster you do it, and the easier you do it is with quad gates.
Yeah.
And then if you want to redo it 20 years later, so be it.
Well,
I mean,
we've gone to the council in favor of quad gates at Watkins any number of times. I don't see that we would accomplish anything by coming through again and saying, hey, don't forget quad gates on Watkins, because...
Well, if they take the money away, I think it would accomplish something. We'd save the money.
Well, what do you get out of a budget, a cost figure?
Not that this
very
is on the
much.
agenda again, Greg. not to beat the dead horse, but it would be in the CPI. So remember, it's what you're referring to as the budgetary issues. But remember, we're also not to remind everybody, Greg, that we're in the middle of looking at the quad gates with Caltrain already. So we're in a process already. We're not putting in quad gates next week. So there is a process that we're already in that's probably going to be pushed out a little bit, because we're not doing the quad gates right now, Greg.
But I do want to go on the record just to state one fact. Just one fact. And that is, I mentioned at the end of a rail committee meeting, either last time or the time before, the reason that right now high-speed rail has indefinitely postponed studying these 4 archetypical situations. They're not studying Watkins to see if what the cost of quad gates is there. They were going to come up with 4 examples of what it would cost to install quad gates. This is high-speed rail. They've indefinitely postponed that. And what I handed out last time was the proof that the Federal Railroad Administration now says in black and white, definite terms, if you go 110 miles an hour or less, which is what Ben Trapusa said they would be traveling at, there are no quad gates required. And when Ben Trapusis was here and spoke to the rail committee, he said, we're not putting in, we high-speed rail are not putting in quad gates because we don't need to, because we're only going to be traveling at 110 miles an hour or less. So I just want to go on the record.
He did say that?
Yes, he did. And there is, and I tried to find a video recording of that, but it apparently doesn't exist. But what he said, it was that, and it was a total shock. But the point is that if we're, whatever the facts are, it has been indefinitely postponed by high-speed rail because they, as they said, Ben Trapusis has said they're only traveling 110 miles an hour or less. They have no requirement by the FRA to do that. And he said they had no intentions of doing it. So I just want to go on the
So
record.
if you'd
Let's
like
not
to
look
make
to
comments tomorrow, Greg, show them, please. And it shouldn't be talked about anymore.
I was just saying that again here.
It shouldn't be talked about anymore tonight. It's not on the agenda, not to say the Brown Act is an issue, but it's been talked about. So let's, if you want to talk about the placeholder of the $100,000, please attend tomorrow.
There's one other issue that I would like to bring up. I sent around to you, or Mike sent around to you, a short paper on Caltrain's problems. And Tony very generously offered some great improvements, particularly in the lead-in sentence, which he thought bore nothing to do with the rest of what we said. But I think we should advertise something of this sort in some way to point out that Caltrain has a lot of problems and they're not solving them. And they've made a lot of bad decisions. And I don't know where this should go.
It should go to the county board of supervisors. They're the ones that have control. They can act.
Well, they have 1/3 control.
Right, but you could send it to the other two.
Well, we could send it to the county boards, but we see the county board members in the JPB meetings every month, and they don't raise a fuss about anything that goes on.
By the way, I read that, and I think there's one additional item that could be added to it, is the holdout stations has still never been addressed.
Okay.
That's like a safety risk. I mean,
It was addressed and it was on the TA's agenda and the budget, now, but one person really killed that.
And then, Paul, we did get comments from 3 other members, which I forwarded to you today.
Oh, I didn't see those yet. Okay.
Well, I think that
Well,
may have been
this
sent
is
out
not
before
on
I
the
was
agenda
the
either,
list.
is it?
Yeah, it was
may
probably
well have
3 weeks ago
I'll
or
give
so.
you- I'll give you a paper copy right now.
I was gonna say, Greg doesn't know, he's only on the CPU.
Paul,
Yeah.
this is not on the agenda either, frankly.
Maybe
No,
it
this-
was-
And-
wasn't.
and
We
I-
only meet every 2 months, we gotta do this.
you know, it's,
There are no exceptions
it's
to the
good,
Brown
it's
Act.
interesting, it's, I think we all need to noodle this for a
Okay,
while and think
well-
about
well,
what
let's-
we need to say and what we should do with it.
So, and what are we trying to accomplish too
Yeah.
with it? Are we just make it public record of our issues, or are we trying to affect some change with someone?
The thing that
who's going to-
offends me, Alec, is all of the cities on the peninsula have sidled up and said, we want to electrify. We're the only holdout.
Yeah.
And these are the reasons, some of
Okay.
the reasons why we're holdouts.
Mhm.
And I think that this story needs to be told, because
Okay.
electrification is not gonna automatically solve all the problems that Caltrain says it will.
Okay.
Well, I have just one thought that I have. One of the important things for us is restoring train service for Atherton.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we want to fight Caltrain everywhere we can effectively to meet our needs and goals. But I think that the more we're attacking them, the less likely they're going to be inclined to want to do anything for us and provide the service that we really need and want. And that would be my concern. I totally agree with everything in there. But then I think, what would we gain? What are the important goals that we have? And one of them is certainly to restore service for the town. And the more we're at odds with them, the more likely it is they're going to be less inclined to do anything for us. And so I think what can be gained and what are the risks and what really is important. And we've always fought very hard to try to restore rail service here.
Yeah, so this sounds like this ought to be possibly, if you want to put on the next month,
Yeah. Let's put this on.
It's a great idea. We'll discuss it next time.
meeting's agenda, and
Can a majority of us attend the January 18th meeting with Caltrain and then not run afoul of the Brown Act?
we're attending as individuals. That's a
If you
public
and
meeting.
still, as individuals, talk about.
We're not attending as members of
Okay.
the
Okay.
Atherton Rail Committee.
Okay. I
And
just
if you
wanted to-
speak, you're not speaking in behalf of
No,
the Atherton.
you're
Okay.
speaking, you're speaking
I just
for
wanted to be
yourself.
sure. Okay.
And Paul, I wanted to just for a quick announcement.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
I just have a real brief announcement. This is probably my last rail committee meeting.
Oh,
And the reason for that is I think all of you know, the town is recruiting for a full-time, public works director. And we're actually, gonna be conducting interviews in about a week. So I'm sure that hopefully by January, middle part of January, they'll have a public works director on board. So that person, whoever that new person is, will assume the role of staffing this committee as well as other town committees.
We're gonna lose you, is that who we're losing?
Yes.
Are you applying?
Oh, no.
We're gonna bring Duncan Jones back?
We're gonna bring him back?
I can tell you that he wasn't one of the applicants, so.
Oh, it wasn't one of
what
the-
are you gonna do for a living now?
Did you let him know it was available?
Yeah.
Yeah, we call
Well, yeah, well, all of you know that I'm a contract
Yeah.
Yeah.
and actually, I'm part of a company, I'm the COO of a company, we're called Dana West Consulting Group.
Right.
And so, when I'm not here, that's what my job is, to be the COO of our company.
So you'll be doing other things for the company.
So Mike will also be doing various consulting jobs with the town. This primary role won't be his role because somebody that will be replacing Mike will be actually assuming that under their salary requirement. And Mike will be able to do other things with the town as we move forward with the Civic Center component.
And you sound so disappointed about not being able to come to these meetings every year.
And this is actually a good thing for the town because, with Steve Tyler's retirement, there was an opportunity to kind of consolidate some roles. And by doing this, there's a savings, pretty significant annual savings to the town. So this is, I think a very good thing for the town, and it's the right time for the town to bring on their own, permanent, full-time public works director, city engineer.
Oh, and city engineer. There'll be a combined. Okay.
Yes.
And that means Marty's gonna.
Well, yeah, again, but Marty, we're still very heavily involved in,
Okay, the Civic Center.
Specific at the Civic
Yeah,
Center,
yeah.
right. And then now there's there's another pretty large project, the water capture facility.
Yeah.
Project in Hope.
Different responsibilities, so we'll see different faces.
Okay.
Combining positions that Mike may have been responsible for, reducing costs, and yet still having the bodies in a consultant capacity.
Okay.
So,
Okay. We'll still see you around in the consulting capacity,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Okay,
And I
great.
just also want to say, it's really been, a lot of fun and a privilege, with this group. It's incredible the knowledge and, the expertise that, all of you have. So it was fun for me because I knew nothing about rail and so I learned a lot from just listening to all your conversations. So thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
for
Mike.
your
Thank
service.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for your and keeping us more or less on track.
Trying.
That's hard.
And I want to thank you, Mike. I enjoyed working with you on the Quiet Center.
And I know that Menlo Park is interested in exploring the Quiet Center because at a staff level, they did approach me and I said, yeah, absolutely.
Quiet zone, you say?
Yeah.
Which would be quad gates?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, they could possibly do other things if it's allowed.
Like what?
You could put.
Grade separate.
Great, well, yes. They could cut off the road. They could put in channels if it's doable. But it's other things you could do.
Well, they've got barriers down Ravenswood now.
Yeah, it's almost
That's
qualified.
for sure.
for quiet zone, yeah.
Yeah.
Except you would have to cut off the that street. What is that street that?
It's
Is it Alma?
Alma. It's already cut off.
Yeah, you can't make a left there now.
Well, you
make
can, but
you can make a right turn across
Yeah.
the tracks from Alma, or if you're going eastbound, you can
if
make
you're
a right
stupid,
turn
you can make a left.
onto Alma.
Yeah.
was there a motion to adjourn?
I don't think I heard that.
I got one comment. I spent last week in France in Omaha Beach, and they had a movie there that showed how we built a port that they said would take 10 years in 14 days.
Wow.
It was unbelievable, the movie. I bought it, because I brought it back, because I think you could use that same methodology.
They're the same cost.
So it was Caltrans who did this?
But I couldn't believe it. I looked at that and I said, wow, I mean, this is what so I want the
They-
20 minutes.
They brought
Just
a harbor in.
another way to get to it.
Mulberries.
Yes,
And they had a harbor established there.
it's just unbelievable what
Yeah.
they did.
It was not cheap.
But now we can adjourn. It's all right.
But-
I have one comment or question.
Please.
The agenda says that the next meeting is, or that the February meeting is since February 7th,
That's a Wednesday.
and that's a
Is
Wednesday.
that a Wednesday?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just checked my calendar, I
That's
just found it.
It's the first, it'll be the first Tuesday.
So it's the
Okay, that's
sixth.
The 6th.
Okay, okay. I didn't know whether the words or the numbers took precedence. In my world, it's always the numbers.
I think that the rail committee is gonna have a special dinner tonight at Carpaccio's as soon as we're done here, if anybody wants to join.
Sounds good to me. I'll go with you.
It's not on the agenda, Greg.
Future agenda
That's what I
items,
said.
whatever, whatever is on Greg's mind is on the future agenda.
Is there a motion to
So
adjourn?
moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.